Well, good morning. Do I really look like that? Oh, my word. Much better. You're my new best friend. All right, thank you. I hope everyone's doing well this morning, and I was a little surprised this morning when I walked out in this light coat. I was like, what happened to the warm weather? Anyway. Pardon me? This is the Panhandle. Okay, well, it's also February, so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. All righty. Well, as Pastor said, yes, we're going to talk about courage today, but before I begin, I just want to say a couple of things. Unsolicited, just things that are on my heart. But I just want to say how much I have enjoyed being with you and how I've enjoyed being with the people here, and I've always enjoyed coming to this fellowship. And I just appreciate Alvin and Brenda and their humanness, being real, no pretense, no put on. And I just appreciate that. I admire that, and I just want everybody to know, whether you're part of this church, whether you are visiting here, I just want to know for what it's worth. I appreciate you, stand with you, endorse you, support you in the stand that you're taking in the process that the Father has you in right now, and what you are going to do in the future as you shepherd this congregation. I just wanted you to know that, and I wanted everybody else to know that as well. Okay? And all of the folks that are standing alongside of them, I commend you. Because Pastor said, we are living, and I do believe as well, we are living in the end of days. And Yeshua said that in those times the love of many would wax cold. He warned us that there would be those that would abandon their first love. There would be a day when men would call good evil and evil good. And there's no doubt in my mind, Oscar, that we're living in those days and times right now. And so, understanding that we are all placed here for a purpose. And as we shared last night, we have to commit ourselves to that purpose. And so just for the sake of those who may not have been with us the last couple of services, I want to take you over very quickly to Deuteronomy chapter 8 and to kind of summarize what we've been talking about over the last couple of meetings. In Deuteronomy 8, Moses is speaking to the children of Israel as they are preparing to enter into the land. And entering into the land, being in that specific place, was their purpose, was part of their purpose, to not just live there and raise families and sow fields and raise vineyards, and that was part of it, yes, but more importantly, they were to be there in the midst of the nations, living according to God's instructions, in relationship with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so that they might be the source of blessing to all other nations, that they might be the light to all the other nations, that those other nations would be drawn to that light and come into that relationship with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so in a nutshell, that's our purpose today. That's what you and I are here for. We don't have to go to Nepal or the mountains in Tibet to find some guru to tell us the meaning of life. I can tell you the meaning of life, and I barely got out of high school. It is to be a light to the nations, by allowing His light to shine in us, to shine through us. Meaning that we commit ourselves to that purpose and die to ourselves, crucify our flesh, that He may live in us and live through us. That's why we're here. That's why we exist. And we must commit ourselves to that purpose, but there's going to come a time, as we are stepping into the culmination of these things, He's going to call upon us to manifest courage, not in ourselves, not to be encouraged by what we can do and what our abilities are, but to be encouraged in Him because of what He's already done and what He's promised He's going to do. And to take courage against those things that might be standing in the way. So in Deuteronomy chapter 8, to kind of summarize this, verse 1, Moses speaks and says, every commandment which I command you today, you must be careful to observe, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land of which the Lord swore to your fathers. And so, if we're going to live, and we all want to live, right? 2, 3, 4, anybody else? Okay. We want to live because the dead can't praise Him. He's the God of the living, not the God of the dead. So we want to live. That's what He put us here to do. But if we're going to live, we have to be careful to observe every commandment that He has given us, so that we can multiply, so that we can make disciples. We are called not to make converts. Right? We are not called to make converts. We are called to make disciples. And to make disciples is going to require that we be in relationship with people. Right? We're not drive-by theologians. That's not what we're called to be. We are called to make disciples. And in order to do this, we're going to have to keep these commandments that He's given us. And so that we can go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to your fathers. Verse 2, and you shall remember that the Lord your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you and to test you. Remember back, think back of all the things that you've gone through. All the things that He's brought you through. Well, here's how and why He did that. To humble you. To test you. And why? To know what was in your heart. What was in your heart? Did it match what you said? I'll never deny you. Right? And then, what did Peter find out? What really was in his heart? What kind of a man he truly was. But the Creator says He wanted to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep His commandments or not. And so He humbled you, and He allowed you to hunger and fed you with a manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that He might make you to know that man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord God. He did that even when He knew what was in our hearts. And so He's brought them to this place that they are preparing to enter the land. And entering the land, once again, is synonymous with fulfilling our purpose and being committed to fulfill that purpose. So now we're going to go over very quickly to Deuteronomy chapter 31 and see what's going to be required for all of this to come together. Deuteronomy 31, beginning at verse 1, Then Moses went and spoke these words to all of Israel, and he said to them, I'm 120 years old today, and I can no longer go out and come in. Also the Lord has said to me, You shall not cross over this Jordan. The Lord your God Himself crosses over before you. He will destroy these nations from before you, and you shall dispossess them. Joshua himself crosses over before you, just as the Lord has said. And the Lord will do to them as He did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, and their land when He destroyed them. The Lord will give them over to you, that you may do to them according to every commandment which I have commanded you. Let's pause here. If you'll think back with me, 38 years before he made this statement, the children of Israel had come to the point of crossing over into the land. They sent spies into the land to see not if they could take the land, but to see how they were going to take the land. And they went into the land and they spied it out, and they came back with the cluster of grapes and all the fruit of the land, and they told the people, it is a good land. Just like Moses said, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. But there's something there that Moses didn't tell us about. There are giants in the land, and we appeared as grasshoppers in their sight. There are fortified cities that go up to the heaven. And when they gave this accurate, nonetheless evil report to the people took the attitude, the only reason God brought us out to this point is to kill us. He brought us out of Egypt, redeemed us by the blood of the Lamb, opened the seas with the breath from His nostrils, brought us through the sea, gave us water from a rock, fed us manna all these 40 years, did all these miracles. He did all of that because He hates us and wants to kill us. Now, we like to think that were we back there in those days, we would not have let that happen. We would have been one of those standing up, we can do this. Well, it's easy to say things, isn't it? It's another thing to do it. So 38 years later, here's the point, those giants are still there. Those fortified cities are still there. But Moses is telling the people, don't be afraid of them. In fact, verse 6 he says, be strong and of good courage. Do not fear nor be afraid of them, for the Lord your God, He is the one who goes with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. And so my point in this is they will assume, understood the concept of their purpose, and by this time we'll hope that they're committed to it, but it's still going to require something of them. And that is that they be of good courage. And so I would suggest to you, based on what we just read, that you cannot possess the land that the Lord swore unto your fathers, which is to say, you cannot fulfill your purpose the way the Creator intended it if you're going to be afraid of the obstacles that are before you. He doesn't necessarily remove those obstacles before you ever get there, and I believe it's because He wants to see who really trusts me, who really believes me. It's one thing to say, I trust you. It's one thing to say, I believe you. It's another thing to actually put it into motion. So He didn't remove the giants before they got there. He didn't remove the fortified cities before they got there. He actually had them cross over the Jordan to confront these things. But He said, be strong and of good courage. And so again, I'd recommend to you that we will not fulfill our purpose if we're unwilling to face the obstacles that are before us. Yeshua gave us the parable of the sower, and I'm sure that everybody's familiar with that, how a man goes out and he sows seed, and some of the seed falls over by the wayside, some falls upon stony ground, some falls among the thorns and the thistles and the weeds, and some falls on good ground. And that falls on good ground produces fruit, some 30, some 60, some 100-fold. And then when He gives us the explanation of that parable, He says, well, that which fell by the wayside that got snatched up by the birds, that's representative of those people that as soon as the word was sown in their heart, the adversary come and he snatched it away. And that which fell upon the stony ground, well, it has no depth of earth, and so it sprung up really fast. But as soon as it got hot, it melted away, or it withered away. And then there was that fell upon among the weeds and all the things, the cares of life, and got choked out by those things. Allow me to put that in today's world. There are some that the Word, who is Messiah, by the way, the Word personified is Yeshua. As soon as that Word fell into their heart, you know what the adversary does? He comes to try to take that Word out of their heart, but more specifically, tries to convince them that Yeshua was just a man. Tries to suggest to them that He was just a man. Some people think, well, he was a great prophet, he was this, he was that, he was a great philosopher, but he was just a man. Some people even say that, well, I think he was the Messiah, but I don't believe he's God in the flesh. It's the adversary that snatches that out of their heart. Then there are those that the seed will fall, but because it's on stony ground, which in my view kind of represents a hardened, calloused heart. It comes up really fast, and they start a ministry. They start a website ministry, and they assert their authority that they believe God has given them to go out there and teach this and share that, and a lot of times sow confusion and discord, but as soon as it gets hot, as soon as the pressure's on, they disappear. And you never see them again. And then there are those that the seed falls among the weeds and the thistles, and they're looking around at the cares of life, black helicopters, chemtrails, FEMA camps, the Bilderbergers, who's going to be the Antichrist, when's the tribulation begin, going up to Montana and storing up this, that, and the other because the world's going to end next Tuesday. They get choked out by the cares of life. But then there are those that's considered to be good ground, and they produce fruit. Some 30, some 60, some 100-fold, which would then suggest that these are those who have withstood all these different things that are swirling around them, and all the voices and all the different things that are going on in the body. When Paul talks about that we are to be mature, not being as little children blown about by every wind of doctrine? Where do you think all the winds of doctrine are blowing? Not out in the world, within the body. Is anybody hearing what I'm saying this morning? And so it is going to take courage, ladies and gentlemen. It is not necessarily that we know all of the answers to all of the questions. In fact, I'm convinced that we will go into the kingdom still scratching our heads about a lot of things. I am convinced that when we sit down in the kingdom and the Messiah begins to reconcile some things for us, we're going to be shocked, we're going to be surprised at how far off we were on some of these things. I don't know if I shared this before with this particular group, but I do a teaching called the Foundation Stone. And in that teaching, I come to this conclusion, that I will spend a lifetime searching this word over here, trying to understand more and more of it. But the more I study, it just makes me realize how much more there is I don't know. It's like walking into a room and seeing 5 doors and knocking on one of those doors, and it's opened to me, and I go into the next room and see all the things that are in this room, only to discover that along with all the things that I'm now understanding, there are 5 more doors to knock on. And I knock on the next door, and I go into that chamber, same thing. And this keeps repeating itself. And so, what I know today, I'm trusting, is less than what I will understand tomorrow. But I also understand that what I don't know today is less than what I won't know tomorrow. Do you understand what I just said? Meaning that at the end of my life, there will be more about what He says, what He is, what's in this Word that I don't know than what I do know. And so, the things that I do know had better be the most important things to know. Did you understand that? And so it's about getting back to the fundamentals. It's about being good ground that's impregnated with His Word and producing fruit. Because this is how I glorify my Father in heaven. By producing fruit. What does that mean? By His Word living in me living His Word and producing fruit that is attractive to people who are hungry. That is attractive to people who dwell in darkness. So with that, let's go to Genesis chapter 25. Now, I realize that Sunday mornings are a little different as far as time, and I want to be respectful of your time. I realize that at a certain point that your belly is going to begin to growl, and your internal clock is going to begin to say he needs to wrap this up because we need to beat the Baptist to the restaurant. Wait a minute, you are the Baptist. I'm going to try to be respectful of your time, but at the same time, I want to share with you the things in the best way I know how that the Father's placed upon my heart. In Genesis chapter 25, we have the story of Jacob and Esau, the birth of Jacob and Esau. And I'm not going to go line by line here. I think we've shared some things here before about Esau specifically. But in the story of Jacob and Esau, here's what we have. We have a woman by the name of Rebekah, or Rivkah in Hebrew. And she's been married to this guy by the name of Isaac for 20 years before she gives birth. She's been barren for 20 years. And so Isaac had to intercede on her behalf, and she conceived. But instead of being overjoyed with this pregnancy, she's troubled by what she discerns is going on inside her, because the children were struggling within her. And so she goes to inquire of the Lord about what's going on, and the Lord tells her that you've got 2 nations growing inside your womb, 2 peoples that are going to be separated from your bowels. One's always going to be stronger than the other, but in the end, the older one is going to serve the younger one. So, we know the story, how this develops. You've got this guy by the name of Esau. He's born first, and when he emerges from the womb, it describes him as being red or ruddy. That Hebrew word there also can imply carnal and earthy. He is hairy like a garment. That word in Hebrew also implies like a goat. It's the word that is used to describe a goat in Hebrew. And so he's a earthy, carnal personality that is associated with the goats, and that should trigger something in your your memory right there. He is a man with appetites, with lots of desires. And those appetites, according to what we read in Scripture, he needs them satisfied right then, right there. He doesn't marry someone that his parents approve of. He goes and marries not once, but twice, the daughters of the land, the daughters of Chet, the Amorites, these Canaanites, much to the chagrin of his parents. And later on, when it finally dawns on him that his parents weren't happy with these marriages, what does he do? Does he go and choose a wife that they approve of and get rid of these strange wives? No. He goes to Uncle Ishmael's house in Saudi Arabia and takes one of his daughters as a third wife. So he has these appetites that need to be satisfied. And really, it doesn't matter to him what he has to do in order for those appetites to be satisfied. Where the birthright is concerned, something that is holy, something that is sacred, in fact, very important to his father and to his father, it means nothing to Esau. It means no more than a bowl of soup. And so Esau is this carnal, earthy, reprobate personality that is more than willing to exchange what is considered to be holy for something that is common. But if you look at his appearance, he's a man's man. He's a man of the field. He's a skillful hunter, it says. Compare that to Jacob. Jacob stayed home and cooked. Kind of interesting to me, anyway. Jacob stayed home and cooked, apparently. But it says that Jacob was a temperate man, dwelling in tents. The dwelling in tents is an idiomatic expression to suggest that he was a shepherd. He was associated with the sheep. So you got one associated with the goats. You got one associated with the sheep. You got one who is unbridled, undisciplined, carnal, earthy, wants all of his appetites satisfied, but then you have one who's a temperate man. Well, what does it mean by saying that he is a temperate man? It doesn't mean that he has no evil inclinations. It's not saying that he doesn't have desires. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have passions. It means, though, that he does not allow those inclinations to rule him. But he's disciplined, and he rules over those things. And so we have these two opposing men, personalities, but I want to suggest to you natures. Let's not just look at them as men who lived thousands of years ago, but let's look at them as representing two natures. And let's go one step further. Rebekah, of course, is married to Isaac, and Isaac is a picture of the Messiah. Does everybody understand that? He's the promised seed. He's born of a woman that's not supposed to be able to give birth. He's the one that his father put the wood, literally the tree, on him for him to walk it up to the top of a mountain in order to be lifted up as a sacrifice. And so Isaac is the picture of the Messiah. He's the bridegroom, so to speak. So who would Rebekah represent? The bride. And for a while, the bride was barren. But then her bridegroom interceded on her behalf and she conceived. Let's put it this way. Maybe that is representative of your born-again experience. Because you see, when we are born again, it is of an incorruptible seed. When you and I entered this world, Psalm 51 says that you and I were conceived in iniquity. We were shaped in iniquity. We came into this world with a carnal, earthy nature, with passions and inclinations and these things that we wanted to do. Let me give you an example of this, and forgive me. I may be repeating myself again. I do that quite often. I've slept since the other night, so I don't know what I said the other night exactly. But did I share with you about my first son, Brandon? Did I share that with you? All right, when Brandon was born, he's 26 now, but when he was born, he was the first grandchild on both sides of the family. Meaning that we were inundated with every gift, every toy, every little contraption that a little baby could ever hope to have. In fact, he had toys that he wouldn't play with for years. So you got the idea here. All right, and so we were living in Florida, And we didn't have two nickels rubbed together, as they say. But here are all these toys coming in for this little boy to play with. Well, he's a little baby, and then he starts to become a little toddler, starts scooting around. And so when he started scooting around and getting interested in everything, we would bring all of his toys into the living room. And the reason we did that is because it was a sunken living room. So we were fairly confident he wasn't going to go too far as long as he was in that sunken living room. So we'd put all of his toys down there. Now, have you observed that when little ones have all these toys, they would much rather play with the box that came in? They would much rather go into the kitchen and drag out pots and pans and play with those things rather than all the toys that everybody spent all their money on. Isn't that wild? There's a lesson in that somewhere. Well, Brandon was the same way, except it wasn't pots and pans and boxes so much. It was a plant that my wife had received when she was in the hospital, and this was the one plant that had managed to survive. She had kept it alive, and she was so proud that it was alive, she put it in the living room in the middle of the coffee table, and Brandon was fascinated by this plant. And so when he was down there in the living room, instead of playing with all of his toys, he would scoot himself over to the coffee table, and he'd pull himself up on the coffee table, and he'd reach out for the plant, and he'd play with that and put it in his mouth and break off the branches and all this kind of stuff. And so, we were trying to tell him, no, don't mess with the plant. But every day, we'd put him down there, and he'd go over to that table, and he'd pull himself up, and he'd start messing with the plant. And so finally, I came to him, and I said, you may freely play with all the toys that are in the living room. But of the plant that is in the midst of the coffee table, you shall not play with it, neither shall you touch it. Because in the day that you play with the plant, I will swat your little bottom. So here's what happened one day. We put him in the living room. He's playing with his toys a little bit, and then it starts getting real quiet. So I go in, and I'm looking, and he's scooting over to the coffee table, and he's pulled himself up on the coffee table, and he realizes that I'm watching him. And he looks at me, and he looks at the plant. He looks back at me, he looks back at the plant. And then he stuck his hand out toward the plant and got it just as close as he possibly could to that plant without touching it, and then looked at me as if to say, so what are you going to do? So what I did was I discerned the intention of his heart, and I popped his little diaper. So what's my point? Where did he learn that from? Where did he learn that? It was inherent within him because we are conceived in iniquity. And therefore you and I had to be born again of an incorruptible seed. And when we were born again of that incorruptible seed, that is the Word of God, that is the Messiah, all things were passed away, and behold, all things are new. We are a new creation in Messiah, right? How many of you can testify to that? Now, how many of you can testify that it wasn't very long before you found out that there's still a struggle going on inside you? Like Rebecca. She thought she should be overjoyed, but she realized there is a struggle going on within. What's going on? I thought I was pregnant. I thought I had conceived. Why is this going on? Something's not right. And so let me extrapolate that out and use myself as the guinea pig. When I was born again, I just had this assumption that now everything was just going to be smooth sailing. That I was just going to be walking on clouds all the time. That didn't come out right. But I soon discovered that even though there were some very obvious and blatant things that were very easy to let go of, over the years I've discovered that there are things that aren't so easy. There are some attitudes. There are some emotions. There are different things about who and what I am that have presented obstacles from time to time. And so when I get up in the morning and I look in the mirror, I see a person who has the potential anyway to do what they want to do. There are days I get up, I don't want to do what God wants me to do. I know the pious people are cringing right now. But there are days I get up, I don't want to do what He wants me to do. I want to do what I want to do. 3 or 4 people nodding their head in agreement. Some people are now wondering, what's he doing up there on that platform? Sometimes I have the same question. And so I have to make a decision. Am I going to give in to what I want to do? Or am I going to crucify that flesh and suppress it and allow Him to live through me? And every honest person in this room knows, I don't care what's going on up here, you know in your heart that there are things that from time to time, season to season, you will struggle with. Sometimes, with some folks, it's anger. With some folks, it's bitterness. Some people, it's pride. Some people, it's greed. Lust for power. Some people, it's lust of other types. But the writer of Hebrews says that we are to lay aside that sin, or the sin, that so easily besets us. Now, is he talking about sin in general? Okay, yeah, I would say yeah. But is it possible that he's also suggesting that there is that thing that each and every one of us deal with? Each and every one of us have that little thing that in our lives it keeps popping up again and again, and we think we get victory over it, and it goes away, and everything's going well, and then all of a sudden, boom, something happens, and there it is again. And we end up praying prayers like this: Father, forgive me of this again. Now, some people would argue, oh, that's not supposed to happen. Well, then, explain me. I'm just saying that's the reality of life. Explain me. It's because there's this struggle going on within us. The Creator acknowledges it. It's that old man that wants to rise up and overcome or suppress the spirit man. And the spirit man's trying to keep that old man down. Or let me put it this way. When I was born again, my destiny was to be Jacob, so to speak. To be Israel, so to speak. To be the one that overcomes. But when I first came into this world, my nature was like Esau. And so within me, there is this struggle going on between Esau and Jacob. And Esau, he's very crafty at what he does. He's very sly. He wants that appetite satisfied. And you know what? A lot of times, Esau he'll act like he's one thing to try to disarm everybody, to make them think that he's one thing when in reality he's something different. Let me rephrase it. It says that he is a skillful hunter. In Hebrew, that literally means he knows how to trap. He knows how to set a trap. And you have to be good at setting a trap. And the whole idea here is that, well, if you're going to go hunt a game, you don't want the prey to know that they're in danger. And so you want to make them think that everything's okay. Everything's just as it should be. Because you don't want them to panic. You want them to be seduced into coming into your snare. Ladies and gentlemen, our flesh is very crafty and very sly, and lots of times it likes to wear robes of piety. Let me ask you this question. In Genesis 25, verse 28, it says that Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is called such because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were the patriarchs. So my question then is, how is it that the patriarch of Israel, Isaac, prefers the one that God rejects? Has anyone else ever thought about that? How is it that Isaac, this righteous, pious man, he prefers the one that God says he hates? Jacob I have loved. Esau I have rejected. And by the way, not because God just went eeny, meeny, miny, mo. It was because Esau first rejected God. So back to the point. Why did Isaac prefer him? Here's my opinion. It says because he ate of his game. But literally what that says, because trapping was in his mouth. And the question then would become, whose mouth is it referring to? Is it suggesting to us that Isaac's mouth was salivating at the thought of the game that Esau was going to hunt down and cook for him? Maybe. Or is it suggesting to us that trapping was in Esau's mouth and he posed for his father as something he really wasn't? Which sounds an awful lot like who? The one who comes posing as an angel of light. Are y'all still with me here? Remember, why are the tares sown in the midst of the wheat? Not so that they can be buddies. Not so that they can coexist with one another. I'm sure it's out here too, but you ride around the country, you see all these little people with their little cars with the blue bumper stickers on the back that say coexist. Oh, it sounds so nice. Sounds so honorable. Such a noble aspiration to coexist with one another in peace and brotherhood and harmony. Only problem is, they don't want to coexist with you. They want you to coexist with them so that they can steal, kill, and destroy. They have no idea, they have no goal, or they have no intention, of coexisting with you. That's just their little trap to get you to mix and to mingle with their philosophies and their ideologies. See, that's the way Esau works. But not just on a corporate level, but also on an individual level. Let me put it to you this way. And I know this wouldn't apply to anybody else in here, but there have been times that I've done things that I shouldn't do. And it didn't just happen like that. It started here. I started convincing myself why it would be okay for me to say that to that person, or why it would be okay for me to do this. And I'd begin to justify it, and I would begin to massage the text to justify my position. In other words, the Esau in me that wanted to rise up would wear robes of piety to convince me that it was okay to say this, to think this, to do that. Shocked? Esau's very crafty in what he does. And there's an Esau in us that wants to rise up. And we have to make up our minds every day to crucify the flesh that's in us. Because if we don't, you know who's going to be running the show by the end of the day? The Esau in us. Now, what does this have to do with courage? Well, you know that after Jacob obtained the blessing, he obtained the birthright because Esau exchanged, or sold, if you prefer, his birthright for a mess of pottage, a bowl of soup. He cared nothing for those things that are holy and sacred. It was no more than a meal to him. However, when Jacob obtained the blessing from Isaac, you recall that when Esau discovered this, he was wailing, he was crying, he was lamenting, because he realized he had lost the stuff, he'd lost the blessing, but he didn't care anything about the birthright. And so when he discovers this in Genesis chapter 27, here's what he says to his father in verse 36. Esau said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob or Yaakov? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now he has taken away my blessing." Well, what's wrong with that statement? It's a lie. How is it a lie? Because Jacob didn't supplant him 2 times, the birthright and the blessing, did he? No, Esau gave that away. But as far as we know, Isaac wasn't aware of that. So what does Esau do? He takes something that's true. Yeah, Jacob did go in, and he did pretend to be Esau to obtain the blessing. Who put him up to that, though? And when his mother was telling him to do this, here's what Jacob was saying. Bill's paraphrase. I don't want to do that, Mom, because if I go in there and he discovers that I'm really Esau, then I will be viewed as a deceiver. I don't want my father to think that I'm a deceiver. In other words, it went against his nature to deceive. It went against his nature to, if you will, supplant. In fact, his mother said, if there's any curses to be dished out over this, I'll take the curse. You just go do what I said. So back to Esau, he took something that was true, that Isaac knew to be true, that Jacob did come in by deceit to obtain the blessing. But then he blended it with something that wasn't true. Then he took something that, as far as we know, Isaac was not aware of, but he made it to seem that it was true. In other words, he took what was holy and profane, or what was true and false, and he mixed them together, and very convincingly painted the picture that Jacob was a supplanter. Which is where we get the idea that the name Jacob, Yaakov, means supplanter. It comes from Esau, who's earthy, carnal, cares nothing for things that are holy. So how trustworthy should this be? In other words, Esau is the accuser of his brother. And where does that attribute come from? The adversary. So who does Esau emulate? The adversary. Have you ever been accused of anything? Have you ever noticed that oftentimes people will accuse you of what they are guilty of? For instance, you and I in this day and time are accused of being intolerant, bigots, haters. Why? Because we believe in this book. And yet what happens when the CEO of Chick-fil-A tells a Christian publication that he believes in the biblical definition of marriage, one man, one woman? How do the tolerant people respond? They lose their ever-loving minds. You realize that the tolerant people out there would just as soon you die as be here. So the accuser accuses of what he is guilty of. And remember, he often wears robes of piety. And so you and I, ladies and gentlemen, we have to understand what our purpose is. And we have to be committed to that purpose. And ladies and gentlemen, we have to have the courage to walk in that, trusting in the one in whom we have believed, regardless of what the accuser is railing against us. Because the accuser will oftentimes try to wear those robes of piety to build themselves up while tearing you down. So you better know what you believe. Because oftentimes they will come in and they'll throw all these theological concepts around and sow confusion. You better know what you believe in. And you better have the courage to walk in that. Now, Esau is at this point intent on killing Jacob. That's the real objective, not to coexist with him, but to kill him. And so Jacob's mother, Rebekah, hears of this plot, and so she goes to Jacob, and let's see, verse 42, and the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah, chapter 27. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, surely your brother Esau comforts himself concerning you by intending to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay with him a few days, until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereaved also of you both in one day? So he's really upset about what you did to him. So you need to go to my family's house in Haran. Stay with them a few days. When your brother settles down, I'll send for you. You can come back home and we'll all have a happy family Thanksgiving. But the problem is, according to Amos chapter 1, Esau's fury and hatred never dies down. It's perpetual. It's eternal. Meaning, ladies and gentlemen, that to date, Esau still wants to kill Jacob. And you can view this on different levels. You can look at it as the Israeli-Palestinian issue, but let's bring it closer to home. Let's look at it as the tares and the wheat. The tares want to steal, kill, and ultimately destroy the wheat. But even closer to home, do you know that carnal nature in you that you crucify every day? Do you realize it wants to destroy you? It wants to destroy you. Now, wait a minute, I thought I was born again. I thought I was a new creation. Right. But how many of you have received your glorified body? Let me see your hands. No one? And so, according to what Paul writes in Romans chapter 8, I'm paraphrasing, if you haven't received your glorified body yet, then we're still struggling. We struggle with that flesh that wants to rise up. I'm not saying we're going out and committing sin every day. I'm saying that we're struggling with that, in that war with this flesh that wants to have its way. And it doesn't have to be those obvious, blatant things. It could be those things that nobody else even knows about. Those things that maybe your spouse doesn't even know about. Those thoughts that you don't even acknowledge. We are in a struggle. And therefore, Paul writes in Romans chapter 8, and again I'm paraphrasing, that not only is the creation groaning, but we are groaning. And because we are groaning and pining for the redemption, not of our soul, not of our mind, but the redemption of our body. Why? Because there's going to come a day when mortal shall put on immortality, and corruption shall put on incorruption. It has not yet been revealed what we shall be, but when we see Him, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. We are being conformed to the image of the Son of God. But we haven't gotten quite there yet. Agreed? But how many of us are looking forward to that day? I am, and you know why? Here's the main reason. Because once and for all eternity, I can say bye-bye to old Bill. For all eternity, I can say, see you later. So I'm hoping for that. I'm pining for that. My spirit within me, His Spirit that's in me, is groaning for that. Because I get weary. I get tired of the struggle. And not just the internal struggle, but I get tired of the struggle that's all swirling around. And I feel beaten down, and I just want to give up. I want to quit. I just want to disappear. I get tired of it. I get weary of it. Well, this is where courage comes in. Doing what we know we have to do, be committed to that purpose, is going to require courage. Now, when Jacob learns that he is a target, the Bible tells us that he flees to Haran. But when he goes to Haran, he stops on his way in a place called Luz, which he then renames Bethel. And I want to read to you from chapter 28, verse 13. He's asleep and he has this vision. And it says, and behold, the Lord stood above it, that is the staircase, and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father and the God of Isaac. Do you notice anything there? He doesn't introduce Himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. Why? Because this is the initial point where the God of Abraham and Isaac is going to become the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so he says to him, the land on which you lie I will give to you and to your descendants. Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west, to the east, the north and south, and in you and in your seed all of the families of the earth shall be blessed. There again, going back to Friday night, there's purpose. Our purpose is to be a light to the nations, a source of blessing, not just to our friends, but to all the nations of the earth. That's what we're supposed to do. And so, verse 15, he says, "Behold, I am with you and will keep you," literally guard you, "wherever you go." That is, to the north, the south, the east, or the west. Wherever you're going to be, I'm going to be watching over you. "And will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you." It's a pretty powerful promise. But I want you to notice something. He's not just saying it to Jacob the man. He says, to you and to your seed, to you and to your descendants. And lest you think that he's exclusively referring to physical seed, then you should be reminded of what Paul says in Galatians chapter 3, verse 29, when he says, if you are Messiahs, does anybody here belong to Messiah today? Then you are the seed of Abraham and heirs according to the promise. So the promise is not just made to Jacob the man, it's made to the seed. It's made to those who are God's people. And what is the promise? That wherever you go, I will be with you. I will watch over you. I will guard you. The guardian of Israel, the shepherd of Israel, does not sleep nor slumber. The good shepherd is not a hireling. What does the good shepherd do? He watches over the sheep. He guards the sheep. He protects them from predators and from beasts and from robbers and all these things that would come in and try to steal, that would try to kill and try to destroy. That's what the good shepherd does. And so that promise, once again, was not just to Jacob the man, but it was a promise that he made to us, even as he was speaking to Jacob. How many of you believe that? Well, remember, it's easy to say it. But that's what he promised to him. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep, said, surely the Lord is in this place. I didn't know it. And he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, Bethel, and this is the gate of heaven. So from there, he leaves the land of Canaan and he goes into Syria. He goes to Haran, and there he meets Rachel. He falls in love with Rachel. And so he goes to Rachel's brother's house. Rivka was the sister. He goes to Laban's house. And Laban invites him to come into his house. Wants him to stay there. Jacob makes it known that I want to marry Rachel. And I'll work for you 7 years if you give me Rachel as a wife. So that was what was agreed upon. So he worked 7 years. Now, during those 7 years, apparently there was a lot of shenanigans going on that we find out about later on the part of Laban. Changing his wages, changing the working conditions, doing all these things that were to Laban's advantage. But Jacob was faithful to work the 7 years, and so at the end of the 7 years he said, give me my wife. So there's this big wedding celebration, and on the night that Jacob's supposed to go into the tent, the Bible tells us that the next morning, behold, it was Leah. Now, first of all, I have lots of questions about that. I mean, how do you not notice? There's a lot of different opinions as to what happened here. We won't get into those things. But it's just a basic, logical question. All right, but here's the question that I've been pondering over the last few months. Considering what God had told Jacob, wherever you go, I'm going to be with you. Wherever you go, I'm going to be watching over you. I'm not going to forsake you. I'm going to do everything that I promised I was going to do. So Jacob's on the way to the tent. And Laban has set his trap. How come God didn't warn Jacob? How come he didn't visit him in a dream and say, this is what Laban's planning? How come there wasn't an angel over there in the shadows saying, psst, Jacob, come here. Whatever you do, don't go in that tent. Didn't happen. Here's my point. God allowed Jacob to step into that snare. why. Now, obviously, somehow, some way, if God allowed this, even though Jacob wasn't particularly fond of it, somehow, some way, it all factored into the Father's plan for Israel. Judah, the tribe of Judah, just to name one, came from the relationship between Jacob and Leah. So somehow, some way, it factored into the Father's plan. It just didn't factor into Jacob's. So there are things sometimes that we find ourselves in that weren't of our making. I mean, I realize that sometimes we do stupid stuff and we reap the consequences of that. In fact, I think most of the stuff that we go through is because of the consequence of our decisions. But this is one of those cases that Jacob, very faithful to work and to fulfill his contract, and is expecting the other guy to be just as honest and just as faithful to keep his end of the bargain. But he was deceived. And God allowed it to happen. We go on and he says, well, she's the oldest, and it's just this way in our country that, the oldest has to be married off first. Well, that would have been a really good piece of information to share with me before. But he withheld that information. So we'll just fulfill her week, make her happy this week during her wedding week, and then I'll give you Rachel if you'll work for me another 7 years. And Jacob agreed to this. And so he works another 7 years so that he can fulfill that contract. And during that time, according to the Scripture, Laban's changing his wages, trying to cheat him, trying to scheme. At every turn, his brother, his kinsman, someone he's supposed to be able to trust, is deceiving him and plotting against him and trying to cheat him at every turn. And here's what's going to develop out of this story. When Jacob finally receives instruction from the Creator to return to the land of your fathers, you remember that Rachel took one of the idols, she put it up under the where she was riding on the camel, and Laban used that as a pretense to pursue Jacob. You see, Laban didn't want Jacob to leave. He wanted him to stay there, because as long as he was staying there, things were going really good for Laban. But he pursued him, and he went into the camp and accused Jacob of stealing his idol. You know the story. But here's the main point. Finally, Jacob lets it hang out. Finally, Jacob just tells him, look, man, I haven't stolen anything from you. I haven't done anything wrong against you. You're accusing me of doing all these things. You're the cheat. You're the liar. You're the deceiver. You have cheated me out of my wages. You've changed them. You've done all these different things, and yet you accuse me. Well, again, that's what the accuser of the brethren does. He wears robes of piety and accuses you of what he is in fact guilty of. But back to my main theme here. Why did God allow Jacob to be in a situation where he would be cheated, where he would be accused, where he would be deceived? Why did he allow that? Here's what built things. It's not so much to expose Laban as being a cheat and a liar, as much as it was to see what was in Jacob's heart. To see what kind of a man he was. Was he going to keep his integrity? Was he going to understand purpose? Was he going to be committed to that purpose? And was he going to have the strength of character to endure all of the accusations, all the deceit, all the betrayal, all the things that were going on? What kind of a man was he? Because you see, it's intended that he be the patriarch of Israel. There is a calling upon his life. There is a purpose that he is to fulfill, but it's going to require that he rise above the Lavans of the earth. It's going to require that he rise above all of the accusers and all of the self-righteous and all those that are on stony ground or in the weeds and all that. They're going to have to rise above that. But in order to do that, you have to crucify your flesh. You have to temper those inclinations. Because every one of us have been in situations where we knew Things were being said falsely, and what was in our heart? What did we want to do? David talks about, and I'm paraphrasing, Lord, prove me. Search my heart and prove me. Because I intend to walk in your integrity. I intend to keep your word before me so that I can walk in integrity. And I think that's what it was all about. It was about Jacob being willing to walk in integrity regardless of what everybody else was doing. In spite of what everyone else was doing. And the greatest example of this, of course, is the Messiah himself. Was he ever accused of anything falsely? That wasn't a trick question, by the way. Was he ever accused of anything falsely? Of course he was. How did he respond? He was like a lamb led to the slaughter. But what did he do? Didn't even open his mouth. I adjure you by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah and the Son of the living God. You say I am. He kept his focus where it was supposed to be. He set his face to go up to Jerusalem. And he didn't allow what everybody else was doing, everybody else was saying. He didn't allow that all to be distracted. That he kept his eyes on what he was sent to do. Now, he knew what awaited him, didn't he? He knew what awaited him going up to Jerusalem, didn't he? He knew that it was going to be a very agonizing, painful experience. But he did it anyway. And while I'm hesitant to ascribe any human, quote-unquote, attributes to the Creator, and yet the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, which means that he was well acquainted with my infirmities. Which would have to mean that he was well acquainted with this concept of being afraid, and yet having the courage to do what God has sent him to do. When he's in the garden, he's in great anguish. Didn't he say? He's at the point of death. He's in such anguish. And he goes into the midst of the garden to pray, and he prays and prays and prays until what happens? Till his sweat becomes as these drops of blood. And what is he praying? Not once, not twice, but at least 3 times. Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. In Bill's simple way of thinking, here's what we see in that. Here he is addressing the reality of his situation and the emotions that are tied to that situation, and yet reaffirming, nonetheless, not my will, not what I want, not what I would rather do, but what your will is. Strengthen me to do that. That's the standard. That's example. Because again, Messiah walked the earth for 30 plus years. His ministry was, some people believe it's as much as 3.5 years, at least a little over a year, whatever. However long it was, as I said last night, his purpose was fulfilled in 3 days. And so everything that he did leading up to that would not have meant anything had he not fulfilled that purpose. Had he not had the courage to go to that tree, to be hung upon it, so that you and I could be liberated from our sins. The word in Hebrew, kadosh, which means holy. There's a gentleman that does the pictographic meanings of different Hebrew words. And for the word holy, kadosh, to be set apart, pictographically he says it means that which follows the threshing. If you consider that we are the good seed sown in the field, we are the wheat, well, that's okay, except as that wheat grows and as it begins to mature and put forth its fruit, it still has a casing on the outside that's unfruitful, that you can't eat, that really has to be done away with. And so how do you get rid of the chaff? It has to be taken to the threshing floor, right? And what is meant by threshing floor? Well, my understanding is in the old days, they would take the wheat to the threshing floor and they would strike the wheat against this threshing floor in this violent act to break off the chaff. By the way, where was the temple built? On a threshing floor. Meaning that if I am truly going to draw close to my Creator, all of me that is unfruitful has to die. Everything that is represented by this flesh has to die. And again, I know I keep saying this, but it doesn't necessarily or exclusively equate to those obvious things that we like to point fingers at. That includes the things that no one else sees. All of that has to be broken off of us at the threshing floor if we are going to come in to the presence of our Creator. If we are going to be the men, the women that He's created us to be. So back to Jacob. After his encounter with Laban, he's kept his integrity. Chapter 32, verse 3. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, Speak thus to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight. Then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you. And 400 men are with him. Which suggests very strongly to me that if Esau were coming to kiss and make up, if that was his objective, then there's no need to bring 400 guys with him. And remember, the last time that Jacob heard anything from Esau, it was, I'm going to kill you. So, what might you have been thinking had you heard that Esau was coming and there were 400 guys with him? So it says, verse 7, So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. And he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into two companies. And he said, If Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape. So his plan is that I'm going to divide into two, send one group this way, one group that way, and if Esau attacks one group, well, this one will escape. And why is he doing this? Because he was greatly afraid and distressed. Why? Because the adversary that he had been struggling with all his life was coming. Let me say that again. He's overcome this thing with Laban and the wives and all this different thing and the wages and the deceit. He overcome that. He kept his integrity. But now as he's coming into the land or preparing to come into the land, guess what's there? The obstacles that have always been there. And in this case, he's going to have to encounter and face the thing that's been bothering him and threatening him all his life. That thing that he struggled with from the very beginning. And he can't enter the land. He can't fulfill his purpose until he encounters, until he overcomes. And so, in verse 9, it says, Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, Return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. I'm not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant, for I crossed over this Jordan with my staff. That is, when I was coming out of the land, and it was just me. I had my staff. And now I have become two companies. And so, out here amongst all of this stuff, nonetheless, you have multiplied me, you've prospered me, and now you tell me to come back into the land. And all the things you've already done for me, I'm not worthy of those things. I'm not worthy of the least of these things, but you did it anyway. And so he comes humbly praying. Verse 11, Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. I want you to notice, from the hand of my brother, not from the hand of those guys out there. Deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. Why? For I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. And so what does Jacob acknowledge here? That he's afraid of Esau. That he fears Esau because he understands that Esau wants to kill him. More than the Lavans of the world. More than all those people out there who do all these things to us. He fears Esau because he knows that Esau has the desire and the ability to kill him. And this is what he's been dealing with all of his life. I fear him. So as far as I'm concerned, Jacob's being very, very honest right here. He's not putting on a pretense. He's not putting on a show. He's talking to God and he's just revealing what God already knows is in his heart. And I find this striking because who are we supposed to fear? If God be for us, who can be against us? And we say that and we speak that and we recite that and when we say it, we really believe it until circumstances arise, till all of our buttons are pushed and we're faced with a situation that we have to come to grips with the reality that I fear that. I fear them. I fear him. I fear this. Keeping in mind that he's speaking to the one who had told him 20 years before, wherever you go, I'm going to be there with you. Whatever you're facing, I'm going to be watching over you. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to forsake you until I have accomplished everything that I promised to you. And yet, he allowed Jacob to go through all of these trials, all these tests, and all these things. And now, he's bringing him back into the land in Esau's country. And he says, I fear him. Verse 12, for you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sands of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So he lodged there that same night, and he took what came into his hand as a present for Esau his brother. So here's what I'm getting at. I will speak for me, like I can't speak for you. But there are things in my life that I had no control over. Things that, the environment I grew up in, things that happened to me, some things I did have control over. But when you start looking really closely at yourself, I'm confident that each and every one of us will find that there is something that'll keep popping up from time to time. Whatever it is. Pride, anger, what have you. And if I'm right, I'll bet that you've endured a season of whatever that is, and you pray, and you seek counsel, or whatever it is, and you study, and you pray some more, and you fast, and then you feel like you get a breakthrough, you get a victory, and you feel like, oh, wow, I've overcome. And then, down the road somewhere, pop, that thing will show up again. When the adversary went to tempt Messiah in the wilderness, you remember the story, and finally he left, you will notice that it says that he departed from him for a season. He didn't leave for all time. He said he departed for a season. And so, what is that suggesting? That there will be seasons, ladies and gentlemen, that the adversary is going to come back, or these things are going to pop up again. And in Jacob's case, before he goes in to possess the land, what is he going to have to encounter? It's that thing that he's been dealing with all his life. And now the time has come to face it, to overcome it. And so we go on in chapter 32. Verse 22, he arose that night, and he took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of Yabok. He took them and sent them over the brook and sent over what he had, that is, the gifts that he was sending to Esau. Verse 24, Then Jacob was left alone, all by himself. And then it tells us that a man was there, and he wrestled that man until the breaking of the day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, that is against Jacob, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, "Let me go, for the day breaks." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" As if he didn't know. "What is your name?" "Well, my name is Yaakov. My name is Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Yaakov, but Yisrael." Why? For you have struggled with God and men, and have prevailed. You see, not only do we have to struggle with men, not only do we have to struggle within ourselves, but apparently there comes a point in time we struggle with God. And when that time comes, we're all by ourselves. I don't know who I'm speaking to, but I know that I'm speaking to someone. It's one thing to endure the Lavans. It's even one thing to face Esau, so to speak. But there comes a point in time, I believe, and I think that some of us might be there, when we're struggling with God here. God, why did you let this happen? Why did you bring me down this road? You knew what these people were going to do to me. You knew what they were going to say about me. You knew what was going to happen. Why did you let this happen? And we start questioning things. And here's the question that I've had. God, you said that you were going to do this. You said you were going to be with me. You said you were going to bless me. You were going to guard me wherever I went. And instead of things getting better, they just seem to be so much more dramatic. So much, there seemed like everywhere I turn, there's trouble, there's this, there's that. And so God, did you really mean what you said? You said you'd be with me. You said you would guard me. You said you would strengthen me. You'd cause me to overcome. You said all these things. And it's not that I doubt you. It's not that I doubt you can do these things. It's just I'm wondering, will you for me? I know you did it for Abraham. I know you did it for Isaac. And yeah, you did it for Jacob, and you did it for David, and you did it for all these guys, but I'm Bill. I'm just this guy who grew up in South Georgia. I'm not even sure why I'm here. So, even though I believe you can do it, I'm just not so confident that you're going to do it for me. Because me. You know me. You know what kind of a person I am. You know what I have the potential to be. You know what I've thought. You know what I've wanted. You know me. So God, I'm just not. I'm not sure that you're going to do this for me. Maybe that's what Jacob is doing. Struggling not only with men, but struggling with God. And so you see, when he overcome these things, that's when he went from being Jacob to being called Israel. He still had to face Esau. But I want you to notice that when he goes over and he crosses over the Jordan, and here comes Esau with 400 men, and in my heart, this is what I believe, Esau had every intention of killing Jacob. But what happened instead? When he saw his brother, he ran to him, he embraced him, he kissed him on his neck. Some people say that it was a put on, some people say it was genuine. But here's the point. However you want to look at what Esau did, let's look at what God did. He answered his prayer, and he delivered him from his brother Esau. Now Esau says, "Hey brother, it's been a long time. Why don't we all go to my house in Mount Seir? And if you read the text, Jacob is basically saying, well, why would we do that? And then Jacob says, well, look, I've been traveling a lot, and, we got all these flocks and herds, and got all the kids, and you know how kids are when you're traveling. You're always having to quiet them down, and if I have to stop this wagon, and, if we continue on that journey, we're going to die. So I tell you what, Esau, you just go on, and we'll catch up with you. Except, we never see in the Bible where Jacob caught up with him. He never went to Mount Seir. At least it's not recorded. So that tells me that Jacob knew that he shouldn't go with Esau because, you see, Esau still wants to kill him. He can't be seduced into thinking that just because of this little hug and this little embrace, that now it's okay to embrace Esau. Because you see, Esau wants to kill you. Do you understand what I'm saying? Let me put it this way. If we really believe that we're in the end of days, if we really believe that, then as Messiah said, it's going to be unlike anything the world has ever seen. The world has never seen what's about to come upon the earth if we're living where we think we're living. And considering that God always works through His people, that suggests to me, this is not Bible, this is just Bill's thoughts, it would suggest to me that God is going to need a people, is going to call a people, and is going to use a people unlike anything the world has ever seen before or will ever see again. And if you and I are the generation that will see these things come to pass, that means that you and I got picked to be that people. Which then means that the depth of relationship that we've had with the Creator that has brought us to this point will not be sufficient to see us through what is coming in the future. In other words, we may have endured the bonds of the world and all the trials that are associated with that, but when it comes time to come back into the possession of the land, to fulfill our purpose, ultimately, there's going to be Esau standing in the way, and that's whatever it is in us, about us, that we fear. God is saying, before you can possess the land, you're going to have to trust me to overcome that. Because that's what you fear the most. That's what bothers you the most. And so we find ourselves in a situation, maybe not you, but certainly has been my case over the last little bit. I'm not so much struggling with people now as I'm struggling with God. Did you really mean it when you said it? Are you really going to do what you said? Will you do that for me? I know you can do it for others, but will you do that for me? Which then brings me to my final point. I'm sorry. I don't know what I broke, but he struggled with God, but he still had to cross over the brook, and he still had to encounter Esau. Which means that somehow or another he had to muster within himself the courage to believe that God was going to deliver him, that God was going to be with him just like He promised. You see, I take courage not in my abilities. I don't take courage in my talents or gifts. I take courage in Him. Because in spite of everything I see around me, in spite of all the troubles and all the trials, deep within me, I have to muster the courage to believe that He's already gone before me, that it is He who's going to fight the battle for me, and that when I encounter that, whatever it is, that He will deliver me. Not because I deserve it, but because He said it. He just wants to see, Bill, do you really trust me? Do you have the courage to trust me? Some of you will leave here, perhaps, scratching your head and wondering, what in the world was he talking about this morning? But if you're where I think some of us are, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Father, to the best of my ability, I have shared what's in my heart. But now I ask you to do what only you can do. You know who is here. You know what is represented here. Their cares, their trials, their fears, their issues, their hurts, their pains, their doubts. You search all hearts. And there can be no pretense with you. You know us. So I ask you to do what only you can do. And for those who are in a place where they find themselves praying, deliver me, I pray, from my adversary, for I fear him. You've done all these things for us in the past, and we thank you for those. And we realize and we acknowledge that we're not deserving of those things. But now we come into a time and a place that we're facing things that are unlike anything we've ever dealt with before, individually and corporately, and we really don't know what to do. We're afraid. For those people who find themselves in that place, Father, I pray that you will encourage them, that you will strengthen them, and that they will find within themselves the courage to trust that you will do exactly what you promised you would do. It is one thing for us to profess faith. It is another thing to walk it out. And Messiah asks, when he returns, will he find faith in the earth? Because we already see and are witness to the fact that the love of many has waxed cold, that there are those who have forsaken their first love, and there are those who are being choked out by the cares of life, and those who have melted and withered away because there was no depth of earth. But Father, we pray, we trust that the seed that you impregnated us with has fallen upon good ground. But now we find ourselves in a place, Father, where the storms are all around us. Will you preserve us? Is our prayer. Father, strengthen us, encourage us to trust that you will do exactly what you said you would do. And you will do it for us. We didn't choose you. You chose us. Now help us and strengthen us to choose to follow you every step of the way, to set our face, to go up to Jerusalem, to encounter and to embrace what awaits us there, whatever that is. But keeping our eyes upon the Messiah as He leads us. He said that we will see all of these things happening around us. And when we see these things begin to take place, to look up, to lift up our heads. And Father, help us today to lift up our heads that are so weary and so beaten down with all the things and all the cares of life. Help us, Father, to lift up our heads and to fix our eyes on you and be encouraged by you, to be encouraged in you. And I pray this, and I believe, Father, that you are doing this in the hearts of many. And I believe it, and I embrace it. In the name of Yeshua, our Messiah, our King, our Savior, our Deliverer, our Shepherd. Amen.